Ukraine appears likely to dominate the agenda that certainly the developed countries mostly have looked keen to set at the G20. Ukraine, of course, is not the priority of host country India, and we could very likely see a discourse that follows different tracks, different emphasis, different areas of emphasis, if not exactly at cross purposes. The emphasis on Ukraine coming from the US, particularly over recent days leading up to the G20, has been strong and it has been clear. Secretary of State Antony Blinken headed to the G20 straight from a visit to Ukraine, and that follows a $1 billion aid package to Ukraine that has been approved by the US government and by the US President Biden on the eve of his visit to the G20. That package includes military equipment worth about $175 million and to include for the first time depleted uranium shells for the US Abrams tanks, and those are due to be delivered by the end of the year. So a very strong military commitment on the ground. This is the 46th tranche of military aid equipment from the US, and that is now worth well above $30 billion. Biden has also now sought approval for another $24 billion worth of aid to Ukraine. So they're in it for the long haul. These numbers spell determination to back Ukraine, and Biden's presence therefore at the G20 with Blinken there to underline that emphasis is a very clear pointer to a push to Ukraine as the top spot and as the prime area of concern in the agenda. That emphasis is being backed by British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and in a number of his messages just ahead of his visit, Sunak has signaled a determination to back Ukraine and give that top priority now for Britain. He's had little to say about the official agenda India has set out, which is not to say he disregards it, but clearly that is not his prime concern either. India has been keen to downplay Ukraine. Zelensky has not been invited. Indian External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has said that G20 is for the G20 only. At the last G20 in Bali in Indonesia, Zelensky was invited to address the summit by video link, which he did. India has chosen not to take that option. India is in fact now seeking to set its own agenda, make it dominant, make global south the priority. India wants to be the champion of the global south at the big table. It wants to include African Union in the G20 or add to it as a part of that push. It is looking for measures to support sustainable growth, looking for a new role for multilateral development banks. That is a particular issue India is looking at. India is looking at climate change from the position of the South. So a number of preparatory Sherpa meetings usual ahead of such events have prepared considerable groundwork along these lines on which India wants agreement. These moves certainly will have the support of many of the developed countries as well, including the US, and in fact the US has made that clear, and they may well get support and draw agreement, but that agreement itself on these issues may become peripheral to the dominating concerns among the developed countries over Ukraine. The US, the British, NATO countries are not doing all that they have for Ukraine and all that they are pledged to then get more excited about multilateral banks at the G20 than concerned over the war in Ukraine.